Alright, class, let's settle in, let's relax. So, Spider-Man has yet another new movie coming out, and with that, we all know what that summons. Larpers, or posers or tourists, whatever you want to call them. Now, Spider-Man is one of the most larped characters in all of fiction. Don't correct me, I'm right. Educate yourself. So, with that, I think it's time for me, Mr. Neutron, to educate you. That way, you all can LARP correctly. LARP with information. And trust me, if you want to blend in online as a Spider-Man LARPer and say, I like this movie when it was a comic, then let me at least provide you with some ball knowledge. That way you can have some background information to back up your claims, and you can have an opinion to parrot if you want to argue online. Though now I gotta answer. Why is Brand New Day? Or is it what is Brand New Day? Who cares at this point? Spider-Man in the 2000s was experiencing a massive hype period. I mean, Spider-Man had pretty much been the face of Marvel Comics since the 70s to 60s, but the aughts is where the series reached all new heights. An iconic film trilogy, classic games, a beloved animated series, and the comics, well, that got a little complicated. You see, Spider-Man has been appearing in a lot of books. Not just the main Amazing Spider-Man books, but there was also Ultimate Spider-Man, Peter Parker Spider-Man, Spider-Man Blue, Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man. It was a lot, though, at least looking back, a lot of it is good, if not beloved. I mean, J. Michael Straczynski, who wrote the main Amazing Spider-Man books from 1999 to 2008, is one of my favorite Spider-Man writers, period. But also people loved a lot of Brian Michael Bendis' work on Ultimate Spider-Man, which this is the Spider-Man book most movie adaptations pull from for their movies, and it's also one of the better comic runs of Spider-Man in general. However, and remember this well, class, in comics, there is always a looming threat of editorial interference. Sometimes the editors decide they've got this phenomenal idea for a story. Now sometimes this can work, but other times it completely blows up in their face and creates some of the worst storylines of all time. And this is ever more apparent with the story One More Day. A storyline that still makes Spider-Man fans' faces wrinkle in disgust to this day. Basically, I want you all to imagine this. Peter Parker, Spider-Man, sells his loving relationship with Mary Jane to save his dying Aunt May to the devil, which retcons so many important Spider-Man storylines. The death of Harry Osborn? Nope. The marriage of Peter and Mary Jane? Gone. Pretty much decades of impactful stories flushed down the drain. Why? Because Joe Quesada wanted Spider-Man to stay a mid-20-something still bumming for jobs and not in a committed relationship. Yes, because the editor-in-chief liked Spider-Man stories from one specific period, and because of that, he wanted it all retconned. This, as you can imagine, was an idea that kind of upset a lot of people, which now left a small group of writers, Dan Slott, Zeb Wells, Bob Gale, and Mark Guggenheim, to form the Spidey Brain Trust. They called themselves that, to try and work with this new rebooted Spider-Man continuity and see if they could make it work. Oh, also, Bob Gale co-created the Back to the Future trilogy with Robert Zemeckis. You know, he only made one of the best movies ever, but let's get back to the point. Which leaves you asking, did their Spider-Man reboot work? I'm getting to that, give me like 30 seconds. Brand New Day is what they decided to label this new era, or at least the start of this new era, which ran from Amazing Spider-Man issues 546 to 564, which is really from January 9th, 2008 to January 2nd, 2008, publishing about 3 issues of the main series book every month. Mind you, most comics are bi-weekly or monthly, so this was an insane rate to release books. Though they did have a team of 4 main writers and a rotating list of artists, so maybe that helped. But let's get into the story. In the first issue of this era, J. Jonah Jameson kicks the bucket. Okay, he doesn't actually die. He has a heart attack because, well, have you seen the guy? Always yelling, always high-strung. It was bound to happen. Like the sun exploding at 5 billion years. It's just going to be. Okay, let's take a few steps back, shall we? The first issue starts with a back-to-basics approach. Peter lives with Aunt May, hanging at the club with Harry, no Mary Jane, and still working at the Daily Bugle. Also, Spider-Man at this current period of time is generally disliked by the people, which is one of the few things that was dragged over before the reset, involving the events of Civil War, which is its own rabbit hole that I don't really have time to go into today. So yeah, we got a mid-20-ish Peter Parker just dirt broke, trying to move move out, on top of trying to be a superhero while the police are onto his ass for breaking the law. Though there's a lot of new faces here too. Harry has a new girlfriend named Lily, and they also have a new friend named Carly Cooper, a member of the CSI division of the NYPD, and is actually a big help to Peter in his investigations. And there's also Vincent Gonzalez and Al O'Neill, two officers in the NYPD who are also central secondary characters throughout this time of the series. In fact, later on, Peter would move in and become roommates with Vincent. Pete is under a lot of stress, constantly flunking job interviews, new villains he has never encountered before start to appear, and on top of that, there's been a mugger running around with a Spider-Man mask besmirching his name. It sucks, man. He's really rough in it. This is also the introduction to Feast and Martin Lee, aka Mr. Negative, which, yes, the first Insomniac Spider-Man game actually borrows a lot from this era of the series. Everything is here, Mr. Negative's vengeful nature, his gang of inner demons, and even the Devil's Breath poison. But back to Peter and JJ. The Daily Bugle is under a lot of pressure. The sales are low, the company is barely floating on by, and a massive big shot named Dexter Bennett is trying to do a buyout of the company. Which JJ won't let happen because, well, it's his company. Which leads to JJ saving and scratching for every penny he can to stop this hostile takeover, including stopping Peter's checks. Which, yeah, Peter's pretty pissed about. He's finally done with JJ's crap, but with all the stress on Peter, he just blows up on his boss. And to be honest, he is kinda right. JJ pinned a lot of his success on Spider-Man and Peter's pictures, yet Peter never really got any massive checks or congratulations. He just kinda got chumped out of a bigger pay. Thus, in JJ's fury, he goes into cardiac arrest, which sort of starts JJ's overarching story throughout most of the small period of time. Now in the hospital, JJ's wife, Marla, sells the Bugle to Dexter Bennett for the sake of JJ's health. She thinks he can't handle owning the Bugle anymore because of his stress. Now she does do this without telling him a word about it and waiting for him to get out of the hospital, which leaves everyone in a complicated position. Yes, JJ is the creator and the rightful owner of his company, but his wife is also doing this for his health because, well, he had a heart attack. You kinda see where both people are in the right and the wrong. There's a lot of gray area here, and I think it works pretty well. It never comes off as completely like she did this just to get at him. Though in that same breath, it was a massive breach of trust. He was completely out of it, medically speaking, going through surgery, and she chose to sell his company to a man he doesn't exactly have good feelings for. Might I add, on top of all this, Dexter Bennett sucks. If you think JJ lacked integrity, you have not met Mr. Bennett. He completely rebrands the paper to just the DB, which is pretty arrogant, literally making the paper just his initials and leans way too hard into sensationalism. I mean, he just represents just the worst news tropes, creating lies, stealing screenshots from places online, never remembering his workers' names, and stooping to tabloid paparazzi work. And anything that makes you like TMZ is a sin, at least in my eyes. Of course, on top of all this, Peter also has to deal with Mr. Negative's gamble to completely wipe out the entire Carnelli Mafia family. The entire family. He's gone full Anakin Skywalker.
And not just the men, but the women. And the children, too.
It gets really bad. Mr. Negative literally creates an airborne poison, which is the Devil's Breath, that kills every member of the Carnelli family based on their DNA. And he then sends it to the circus where all the wives and children of the Mafia members are sitting in. Of course, Spider-Man does save the day, but has to give Mr. Negative a sample of his blood beforehand. Which, that is going to be important way down the line. And if it doesn't get any better, the Spider Mugger got lucky and ended up stealing one of Peter's web shooters. So, now he's down to a single arm that can fire webs. Honestly, they spend a lot of time focusing on how expensive it is to make web fluid, and how much it sucks when he eventually runs out of webbing. More than usual, at least from what I remember. Oh, I also forgot to mention, there's this new registered hero running around New York called Jackpot. And I know what you're thinking. That's Mary Jane, right? It's complicated, but as of now, no. By the way, the whole registered versus unregistered hero thing is something from the Civil War event. Some heroes work directly with the government, others choose to stay as unidentified vigilantes. So yeah, that's a partial explanation as to why the general public isn't super keen on the wall crawler at this time. Okay, so now we have a good bit of info to LARP with. Mr. Negative was the big villain from the Spider-Man era, and really was the biggest name from this period to stick around, but there's more than that. A whole lot more. Does this guy look familiar to you? No, this is not the Green Goblin, or the Hobgoblin either. This is yet another Goblin-themed villain named Menace. You could tell he's different because he wears gray and red. I guess that's about it, to be honest. This story, the second arc in this little era, is not super about the character of Menace. Instead, it focuses more on Jackpot and her naivety to being a new hero, her clashing with Spidey, and also Spidey now being framed for murder. Why? Because there's been bodies appearing for months with spider trackers on them. yet there's an old model he doesn't use anymore. And before you say anything, it's not the spider mugger, he got, if you know what I mean. If I were to describe this arc in a sentence, everything goes wrong. They're just dropping a lot on Peter here. But here it feels more like they're just trying to set up stories for the future and setting things up than the typical Peter can't have something good in his life BS that a lot of modern Spider-Man writing does. It's balanced out well with moments of levity and care from his support group. Still though, crap just hits the fan here, which leads into the death of a councilwoman who was in the New York mayor running. Though it really wasn't Peter's fault. I genuinely go to say that if Jack Pock just stayed focused on getting the councilwoman to safety before jumping in to help Spider-Man, nothing would have gone south. But hey, at least Peter gets a good payout from his boss. I mean, Dexter Bennett is a dirtbag, but he does pay well, so I guess that's nice. Also, Salvador Larraco does incredible artwork in this story. There's a lot of great artists during this era, and I will mention them when I do think they need to be mentioned. The next arc is about a new villain as well. In fact, each of these little story arcs introduces a whole myriad of new villains. Introducing us to this arc, Freak. Look, the name isn't the most creative, but I genuinely love his premise. Basically, he's a drug addict, mostly to meth, but other drugs too, who ends up accidentally breaking into Kurt Connors' lab. Yes, that Kurt Connors who was the lizard at some point, and takes a new experimental vial and injects it into his veins. As you can imagine, body horror ensues, which is helped a lot by the great artwork from Phil Jimenez. To be honest, most of the artists from this time of this book just do such great work. It is kind of weird for a book to switch artists this much. Usually there's maybe one or two artists working on a book at a time, but I'm not hating this since each artist does bring something fresh to the table. Freak's body goes into a literal cocoon-like state whenever he's fatally injured, and new DNA starts to form in his body, making him a strange hybrid of a lot of different animals together. In simple terms, he's like if you combine Doomsday from Superman with the Thing from The Thing. No, the movie The Thing, not the Fantastic Four character. He's essentially a lunatic who goes around causing chaos, and all he wants to do is kill Spider-Man because, well, he did end up at Connor's lab while on the run from the hero, but he also really likes drugs. He will literally do anything to get some, and now with his freakish powers, he can do just that. I don't know if I could show you his transformation because, well, it's graphic, but it's incredible. If you like horror movies with creative gore or body effects, then I think you'd like the character of Freak. I want to add, Freak is not really meant to be some sort of tragic figure. He's not like, say, Vermin. Wait, that's too much of a deep cut for larpers. He's not like Harry Osborn Green Goblin. The first thing Freak does before he's transformed is steal money from Feast in front of Aunt May just to buy some drugs. Yes, drug addiction is a powerful demon to fight, but I mean, he's literally stealing money from the homeless. Nor does the writer, Bob Gale, do anything to paint him with any sympathy. Which I personally don't mind. Sometimes people just have problems and hurt others. Could make for an interesting future story, but for now, I actually don't mind this depiction to be honest. Plus, you know, we've already had the iconic story of Peter trying to get Harry off of his heroin addiction, so it's not that Peter can't be sympathetic to Freak's problems, but the dude is literally out of his mind. This is counterbalanced with a small B-plot of JJ in the hospital, as everyone is trying not to reveal to him that the Bugle was sold by his wife. Yet, it takes a while for him to learn what happened, and that's mainly because they don't want to cause him stress and set off a second heart attack, which is pretty much ruined as Peter shows up as Spider-Man to try to bury the hatchet with JJ in the hospital. And there, he lets it slip that the Bugle was sold and sends him into a second cardiac arrest. Plus, now Freak has gone back into stasis as a large blizzard comes into New York, which sort of puts a pin in the Freak story for now as we pivot to the next one. This arc has a different feeling than all the previous, actually feeling a lot closer in tone to the work of J. Michael Straczynski's early work on Spidey with John Romita Jr., focusing on a magical concept with a much more unknowable feeling, while still packaged into the smaller scale world of a Spidey story. Basically having Peter fight an ancient Mayan death god, stopping a blood ritual during a blizzard with a Wolverine cameo. Which, to explain why Wolverine cameos here, there was a period of time where they were both on the Avengers. Look, it was a weird era for the team when the members were Captain America, Iron Man, Luke Cage, Wolverine, Spider-Man, and Spider-Woman. Essentially, there's a plot here that involves mathematical equations, gods merging with humans, and there's just a lot more going on. It feels like Peter is out of his depth here, which, personally, I've always liked stories where a new threat appears in New York and Peter has to confront it. It's why the character Moreland used to work before they explained his lore too much. The idea of Spider-Man protecting his city from something much bigger than him will always make for a great story. I don't mean him going into space or other realms, but in the sense that it's Spidey, a pretty down-to-earth guy, taking on a being far larger than him for New York's sake, which I think is done well here. It's also helped a lot by Chris Bacalco's great art, who may be one of the greatest comic artists of all time. If you want to know ball knowledge, Chris Bacalco is a good way to go. To be honest, I had completely forgotten that Zeb Wells had written some great Spider-Man stories before. Now, maybe that's just because his recent run of the book was genuinely kind of awful, but I think that's more so because, say it together, class, editorial interference. Yeah, get used to that. The editors have been Spider-Man's greatest enemy since the 2000s, maybe even earlier than that. But yeah, this story is good. Nothing really crazy outside of the Mayan god stuff, and some wholesome moments between Spider-Man and the homeless of New York. But it's good, though I am interested to see what happens when we get back with the Freak. With also a quick appearance of Menace. Yes, Peter is definitely juggling a lot, even having to ditch chasing Menace to go after Freak. Look, sometimes you gotta get your priorities straight, and while Menace is a threat, Freak is quite literally a biological disaster waiting to happen. He's already evolved again. He's now sporting a much more armored and stronger look. Yet he's actually taken care of quickly when Spidey basically convinces him to inhale a knockout chemical, making him believe that it's hard drugs. This is actually all solved in one issue, but in the next issue, we're introduced to another villain that has a few appearances in the later Spider canon, the Spoiler. This villain was actually pretty ahead of their time, a villain who live streams their crimes. In 2008 when this book was made, live streaming wasn't exactly a big thing like it is now. There were no Kaisenets, no iShow speeds, and no Germas to be seen. This issue quickly turns into a new arc about Peter doing paparazzi work for the DB. With Peter's skills and abilities, he'd be the most terrifying paparazzi to ever live, which is actually shown here pretty much instantly. Now, this whole story I think does get a bit muddled in its messaging. It goes through the whole paparazzi are bad and don't obey people's privacy and how it's unethical, which is all true and I won't deny any of that. But they make the actor that Peter and the paparazzi are targeting just suck so much as a person. The actor they're targeting is named Bobby Carr, and while it does suck his privacy isn't being respected, he also slaps a plate out of a waitress' hand and slams a camera in a guy's face, which draws blood and knocks him to the floor. I understand being a celebrity is super stressful, but did you have to make him such an a-hole? Then at the end, he gives his whole speech about how he has to wear a mask in public and he's not given many places where he could be himself, which, yeah, that's fair, but again, smashing a camera into a guy's face? Then they try to make it out like the people that are suing him are these parasites, which you could argue, but if a movie star smashed a camera into my face, I would sue his ass too, that's assault. Also, yeah, Mary Jane is here by the way, and she seems to miss Peter, kind of implying in this new continuity that they used to be real close but had to split up. Honestly, the best part of the story is when Peter finally calls out Dexter Bennett for his scummy practices and refuses to be his paparazzi, which leads him to getting fired and he finally remembers Peter's name, saying he doesn't forget the name of his enemies. I like that touch, that's actually pretty clever. There's also yet another new villain here, Paper Doll, who has these flattening powers which lead into some creative fights and situations. She's also super obsessed with Bobby Carr on a purely parasocial level. While celebrity stalking isn't new, we hear stories about it all the time. In fact, there's also quite a few stalker supervillains in comics. Eobard Thawne is probably the best example of this, but I do think this character with a celebrity obsession could be interesting. I mean, they show that her obsession with Bobby Carr comes from a place of isolation, seeing him as her only guiding light in this world. I just kind of feel like the story misses the mark in a few places and nails it in others. However, the next story has a lot of fun with Marvel continuity, involving the bar with no name. Imagine this, a bar where all the supervillains go to hang out and take bets on what superheroes and villains will do. Now obviously this bar contains a lot more of the street level villains. You're not exactly gonna see Dr. Doom in here, but you will see the Trapster, aka Pastepot Pete, Hydro Man, you get the idea. I'll be real, the bar with no name is some actual deep Marvel ball knowledge. Well, deep because the average person probably couldn't name it to you or tell you what it is, but this is some stuff to really note down, and really one of my favorite ideas of the Marvel Universe in general. To be honest, the comics have always been far better at making the universe feel connected, but that's a separate conversation for another day. This is a fun story about the owner of the bar, also called the Bookie, who brokers the bets and such, and what they're doing is trying to rig a massive bet. Now, that is already a bad idea, but doing it to supervillains? That's objectively stupid. As you could probably guess, they kidnap the Bookie to teach him a lesson about rigging bets, and Spider-Man has to save him. There's a bit of build-up towards the storyline of Spider-Man being framed, but not much here outside of we definitively know now he is being framed. Other than that though, it's a pretty funny story with a lot of levity to probably help with all the chaos from the previous stories. And yeah, that's pretty much all the issues under the Brand New Day label but one, which is a sort of day-in-the-life type of story issue that follows Peter, Vincent, Pete's roommate and police officer, and the villain Overdrive, who was introduced in the 2007 Free Comic Book Day issue of Spider-Man, but that doesn't matter too much for this story. This is pretty much just one day focusing on these three characters that's meant to set up stories further down the line. And yep, that's all the stories for the Brand New Day banner. I mean, there was a lot of stories after this obviously, but they don't share the same label, so I'm not really gonna count them for the sake of this video and brevity. Really, this time was just a brand new day, metaphorically. So class, what did we learn? Brand New Day is more or less a hard reset of the Spider-Man comics. It retconned decades of Spider-Man lore as well as introducing new ideas and characters. It's probably nothing like what we're gonna see in the movie with the same name. I mean, it definitely will borrow ideas from this era, but it also seems to be pulling from J. Michael Straczynski's run in the Jerry Conway era of Spider-Man, with some mixes of Daredevil, maybe? But now, you've learned all that you can about Brand New Day, the comics. I hope this helps your LARP, and if you want, let me know of any other characters or storylines you want me to help you LARP down below. And with all that being said, I'll see you next time.